Hello, Patriots, praying citizens, and truth seekers. Today is Thursday, May 9th. This day has had enough news to fill 2 weeks worth of broadcasts, but I want to put it all in this one video. Hopefully, it won't be too long. But let me tell you, you've got a lot to be thankful for with this president, Donald Trump, and the way that he owned the media, he owned the narrative today. As he gave a press conference, he started talking about prescription drug prices, and I'll cover that a little bit later in the report, but he basically covered everything. So I'm going to play bits and pieces of what he said, and then I'll cut in with some of the other stories that are out there to sort of round it out. So get comfortable and let's get going.
Allow Robert Mueller to testify.
Well, I'm going to leave that up to our very great Attorney General, and he'll make a decision on that. But I will say this. Look, the Mueller report came out. It was done I guess I'm hearing numbers now close to $40 million with 17 or 18 very angry Democrats who hated Donald Trump, and also everything that they could possibly have at their disposal. There was nobody that was in the history of our country more transparent than me. I said, give them every document, give them every person. Let the White House counsel testify. I think he testified for 30 hours. I guess they must have asked him the same question because there wasn't very much to testify about. But I said, let him testify and let him keep him as long as you want. Actually, when I heard 30 hours, I said, that's a long time. But I let him testify. I didn't have to have presidential privilege. I could have stopped everything. I didn't have to give them a document. I gave them 1.5 million documents. I gave them White House counsel. I gave them other lawyers. Anybody you want, you can talk to. At the end of the testimony, no collusion and essentially no obstruction. Of course, a lot of people say, how can you obstruct when there was no crime, when there was no collusion? How can you possibly obstruct? I'll tell you, but it's worse than that. It's not only was there no crime, but the crime was committed on the other side. So we're protecting against the crime committed on the other side. So after spending all of that money, all of that time, 2 years, they come up with a report. And Bob Mueller's no friend of mine. I had conflicts with him. We had a business dispute. We had somebody that is in love with James Comey. We liked James Comey. They were very good friends, supposedly best friends. Maybe not, but supposedly best friends. You look at the picture file and you see hundreds of pictures of him and Comey. And with all of that and other things, he wanted the FBI job. I don't know if anybody knows that, but as you know, he was considered for the FBI job, wanted it. And the day after he didn't get it, he became the special counsel. That's a conflict. And we had other things, but those are tremendous conflicts. Listen to this. Your judge, call him a judge, has a business dispute with me. Your judge has a fantastic relationship with James Comey. Well, he's a part of this. He lied to Congress. He leaked. He's a liar, a leaker. And your judge has a situation where he wanted to become the FBI director. We chose Director Wray instead and told him, I'm sorry. Those are tremendous conflicts. Those are tremendous conflicts. And then he puts on his staff almost all Democrats, many of whom contributed to Hillary Clinton. None of them contributed to me, that I can tell you. And it started out at 13 and went to 18. These were angry Democrats. These were people that went to her. In one case, went to her, supposed to be a party. It turned out to be a funeral on election evening, and was going wild. He was so angry. And this man now is judging me. You had other people made big contributions to Hillary Clinton's campaign. They were angry Democrats in, I think, almost all cases. One of the people worked on the Clinton Foundation as just about the top person at the Clinton Foundation. With all of this, they came back, no collusion. There's nobody in this room, including you. If they were, that's you, John. If we looked at you with $40 million, 18 angry people that hated you, and all of the other things I mentioned, they'll find something. I don't know, maybe John not. Go ahead, finish it.
Mueller is also friends with Mr. Barr, and as you're aware, Mr. Barr told lawmakers that he didn't have a problem with Mr. Mueller testifying.
I'm going to leave that up to the Attorney General as to whether or not. I think, to me, it looks like a redo. Here's what's happened. The report comes back. It's perfect. It's beautiful. There's no collusion. Nobody even talks about collusion. You know, I haven't heard the word Russia in a long time. There's no more talk about Russia. What happened to Russia? The Russian witch hunt, they don't talk because it was so on collusion, which, by the way, is by far, that's the big deal, because it was all about Russia. So I haven't heard the word Russia. They don't use the word Russia anymore. So there's no crime. There never was a crime. It was a hoax. It was a witch hunt. So this comes back, and it comes back totally exonerating Donald Trump and a lot of other people. This was a terrible thing that happened to our country. Now, I'll tell you what they are asking. They are asking about how did this whole thing start. That's what people want to know. And I want to tell you, I had an event last night. A lot of you were there. Thousands and thousands of people standing in a field. They've never seen anything like it, meaning even the press. But it's always that way. We've never had an empty seat. Thousands of people last night. You know what they want to know? How did this whole thing start? It's going to be hard for them to answer that one. Yeah, please.
So these were my favorites, and I almost cracked up as he's speaking. He says, Bob Mueller is no friend of mine. And then he calls him to the press. He says, your judge. Mueller puts on his staff almost all Democrats, none of whom contributed to me or my campaign. In one case, one went to her party. He's talking about Hillary Clinton's supposed victory party. He says, which turned out to be a funeral. And then he says, and this man is now judging me. They were angry Democrats in almost all cases, and one worked at the Clinton Foundation. So the president said, I haven't heard the word Russia anymore. He said, people want to know, how did this whole thing start? And then the next section, he talks about being very surprised at the subpoena that has now been issued to Donald Trump Jr. because they want him to testify yet again. And he reminds us that in the Mueller Report, which he calls opposition research, it said that Donald Trump Jr. did nothing wrong. He talks about the woman who has walked all over Congress, who left and then went back to Fusion GPS, or as he calls it, GPS Fusion.
That's the Republican-led Senate Intelligence Committee. What do you make of that?
Well, I was very surprised. I saw Richard Burr saying there was no collusion 2 or 3 weeks ago. He went outside and somebody asked him, no, there's no collusion. We found no collusion. But I was very surprised to see my son. My son's a very good person, works very hard. The last thing he needs is Washington, D.C. He could rather not ever be involved. Remember, he said to me a long time ago when I was thinking about running, Dad, if I can help, let me know. It's not my expertise. It's not something I really like, but whatever I can do, you're my father, whatever I can do. He's now testified for 20 hours or something, a massive amount of time. The Mueller Report came out. That's the Bible. The Mueller Report came out, and they said he did nothing wrong. The only thing is, it's Oppo research. If he did wrong, then everybody standing with me probably, except for John and Lamar. I think Lamar is pretty. I'll tell you, did you ever do Oppo research on an opponent? I don't think so, Lamar. And I know John Barrasso never did opposition research because he's a fine, fine man. But I would say 99% of the rest of the folks. So they didn't. But what they didn't discuss is this woman that came in, who I watched her on the Today Show when it all started. Oh, I'm just an innocent. Well, nobody even knows. Although the halls of Congress know her very well because for years she's walked around all over Congress. She came in and she left supposedly GPS Fusion, goes and meets for a short period of time with my son and some other people. They talked about a subject as very well, advertised and put out, which is nothing. It was a nothing meeting. In fact, Jared left. He said, get me out of this meeting. This is a waste of time. She then went back to GPS Fusion. They were the ones that wrote the phony dossier. Why was she going to GPS Fusion? Why did she go back? Then I heard that Don, for a year, made 3 phone calls with an unmarked number. They called it unmarked. And this was a tremendous event because they all knew the fake news. They all know you were fair on that, John. But they all knew that these phone calls, these tremendous phone calls, before the meeting and after the meeting, there were, I believe, 3, right? They all knew that it had to be to his father. Unmarked, it's perfect. So he reported about the meeting and then reported what happened at the meeting. Except after looking and spending a tremendous amount of time and money, they were able to go back years and find out who made the calls. One was a local real estate developer. The other was a great person from NASCAR. He took 2 of them, and a friend of Don's. This went on for a year and a half. John, you heard all about the phone calls to obviously the father, where I never knew about the meeting. But the phone calls to the father turned out not to be the phone calls. My son is a good person. My son testified for hours and hours. My son was totally exonerated by Mueller, who frankly does not like Donald Trump, this Donald Trump. And frankly, for my son, after being exonerated, to now get a subpoena to go again and speak again after close to 20 hours of telling everybody that would listen about a nothing meeting, yeah, I'm pretty surprised.
Should he fight that subpoena?
Well, we'll see what happens. I'm just very surprised. I really am.
Let me talk about this subpoena to Donald Trump Jr. The subpoena has set off a mini GOP civil war. So it's got Rand Paul tweeting that Richard Burr, who is the chairman of the Intel Committee, should be stripped of his chairmanship. Here's the tweet. Apparently, the Republican chair of the Senate Intel Committee didn't get the memo from the majority leader that this case was closed. Then we have this from Kevin McCarthy, who's a leader in the Senate, and he says, Donald Trump Jr. has already spent dozens of hours testifying in front of congressional committees. Endless investigations by either party won't change the fact that there was no collusion. It's time to move on. It's time to focus on issues, not investigations. And now in the next section, the president is going to talk about Iran, talking about them being very threatening. He talks about John Kerry and the fact that John Kerry really does need to be indicted. So let's listen to that.
Yeah.
What did Iran do to prompt you to send an aircraft carrier to the region?
Well, they were threatening, and we have information. We have information that you don't want to know about. They were very threatening, and we just want to have. We have to have great security for this country and for a lot of other places.
Risk of military confrontation, sir?
I guess you could say that always, right? Isn't it? I mean, always. I don't want to say no, but hopefully.
The question, in case you couldn't hear it, was, is this a military confrontation?
That won't happen. We have one of the most powerful ships in the world that's loaded up, and we don't want to have to do anything. What I'd like to see with Iran, I'd like to see them call me. You know, John Kerry speaks to them a lot. John Kerry tells them not to call. That's a violation of the Logan Act. And frankly, he should be prosecuted on that. But my people don't want to do anything that's... Only the Democrats do that kind of stuff, you know? If it were the opposite way, they'd prosecute him under the Logan Act. But John Kerry violated the Logan Act. He's talking to Iran and has many meetings and many phone calls, and he's telling them what to do. That is a total violation of the Logan Act. Because what they should be doing is, their economy is a mess ever since I took away the Iran deal. They have inflation that's the highest number I've ever heard. They're having riots every weekend and during the week even. And what they should be doing is calling me up, sitting down, we can make a deal, a fair deal. We just don't want them to have nuclear weapons, not too much to ask. And we would help put them back into great shape. They're in bad shape right now. I look forward to the day where we can actually help Iran. We're not looking to hurt Iran. I want them to be strong and great and have a great economy. But they're listening to John Kerry, who's violated a very important element of what he's supposed to be doing. He violated the Logan Act, plain and simple. He shouldn't be doing that. But they should call, and if they do, we're open to talk to them. We have no secrets, and they can be very, very strong financially. They have great potential, very much like North Korea. North Korea has tremendous potential economically, and I don't think he's going to blow that. I don't think so.
The president also talked about the Logan Act, which prohibits U.S. citizens from having private correspondence with a foreign government with intent to influence the measures or conduct of any foreign government in relation to any disputes or controversies with the U.S. or to defeat, my autocorrect is giving me problems, or to defeat the measures of the U.S. So, he's talking to Iran, according to the president, and he's been telling them what to do. He tells them not to call the president. He tells Iran not to call Donald Trump. And the president says, but they should call me. We can make a great deal. Their economy is a mess. Ever since I took away the Iran deal, I want them to do great. But John Kerry needs to be prosecuted. And I pulled up this tweet from February 18th from the president. He says, never gotten over the fact that Obama was able to send $1.7 billion in cash to Iran, and nobody in Congress, the FBI, or Justice called for an investigation. So obviously, John Kerry's over there telling Iran, just sit tight, guys, and we'll get Trump out of office, and we'll get Joe Biden in there, and you'll get everything that you wanted. We'll talk about the president's poll numbers in just a minute. Now, I also want to remind you that John Kerry sticks his nose in where it doesn't belong often. So this story is about meddling in Middle East peace talks and talking to the president of the Palestinian Authority and telling him not to yield to President Trump's demands. An Israeli news outlet reported on the meeting between Kerry and Hussein Agha in London, where the 2004 Democratic presidential nominee also reportedly floated a possible encore bid in 2020. But in the conversation, Kerry told Agha to share a message with Abbas, who is the Palestinian Authority president, urging him to hold on and be strong during talks with the Trump administration and play for time and don't yield to President Trump's demands. He also told Agha during his second term that Trump would not be in office for long, suggesting he could be out in a year. Let's go back to a post from our friend on May 4th of 2018, and it links to a Fox News article which I just read to you, and then he says, reread the drops. Today, John Kerry in Iran. Now, this was a year ago. Important. Context for future news. Why is Hussein and why are Kerry traveling worldwide and meeting with foreign heads of state, some enemies of the U.S.? HRC/BC flying under the radar, same, unreported. Why? 2 former presidents and secretaries of state, out of power, out of authority, racing around the world pre and post the election of Donald Trump. Why? Unprecedented. The world is connected. The world is watching. We see what you all are doing. Now, North Korea fired 2 short-range missiles, which was alluded to in this talk by Donald Trump. So here, this is from Fox News, and they had this analyst on, and she talked about the fact that these are just, I don't want to say just, but these are short-range missiles that were fired this week, 2 of them, which are considered to be self-defensive missiles. They were fired 130 miles north of the South Korean border into the ocean. Then Lucas Tomlinson, who is at the Pentagon, and he works for Fox News, he wrote this: USS Rhode Island, a ballistic missile submarine expected to launch long-range Trident II D5 unarmed nuclear missile today in the Atlantic. Test comes as North Korea and U.S. Air Force conduct separate missile tests earlier today, and that's according to officials. Now, we're going to get back to this Steele dossier because, believe it or not, there's more information. Every day, more little drips come out, but, a lot of drips makes, at some point, a bucket of water. This is from John Solomon. He was with Judicial Watch discussing the Carter Page FISA warrant. He says, we now know from the testimony of Andrew McCabe, who was deputy director at the FBI, that without the Steele dossier, they would not have gotten the FISA warrant to spy on Carter Page in the final weeks of Donald Trump's campaign. So here's the timeline. Without the Steele dossier, they had no ability to spy on Carter Page, who was a Trump associate, and then they legally went back and got all of his conversations inside the campaign with the Steele dossier. They built a spider web outward to spy on others through Carter Page. The FBI says it started with George Papadopoulos on July 30th, 2016, but now we know that Steele gave his dossier to the FBI in London, their office in London, on July 5th that same year. And the same day, July 5th, Comey announced that Hillary was cleared in her email server investigation. Gee, it's funny how all that stuff happened at the same time. On July 30th, again, right before they started spying on George Papadopoulos, Steele met with the Orrs, Bruce and Nellie, and remember, Bruce was Associate Deputy Attorney General, and the next day Bruce calls his buddy Andy McCabe at the FBI, and that is the same day that they open the investigation into George Papadopoulos. What a mess they have. Then there was another story that came out, and this is something that we've known about in the movement that we're part of, Great Awakening, that Steele and, as Trump calls them, GPS Fusion, were paid investigators for the FBI. And then we come to find out that it's very probable that Christopher Steele and, as President Trump calls them, GPS Fusion, were paid investigators for the Mueller team. So here, this is an article from The Federalist. Did Robert Mueller tap Fusion GPS and Christopher Steele to assist his anti-Trump investigation? So the net information here is that Mueller spent more than $732,000 on outside contractors, including private investigators and researchers, but his office refuses to say who they were. So Mueller sent his team to London to meet with Christopher Steele from Fusion GPS within a few months of taking over the Russia collusion investigation in 2017. Remember, Steele was MI6. Mueller's lead prosecutor, Andrew Weissman, who is the guy that Trump referred to as being part of the Mueller team who was on stage with Hillary during her quote-unquote funeral, had shared information he received from Fusion with the media. Mueller's report recycles information in the dossier, which Comey himself called salacious and unverified. It seems that these two guys who were best friends weren't really talking to each other. The Mueller report cites Yahoo News articles and other articles as supporting evidence that used Steele and Fusion as sources. So this is what's called circular reporting. Mueller recycled the accusation that Moscow had compromising tapes of Trump with Russian hookers. This was hidden in a footnote citing an October 2016 text that Donald Trump lawyer Michael Cohen received from a, quote, Russian businessman that said, quote, stopped flow of tapes from Russia. But that guy's lawyers are demanding a retraction because apparently Mueller omitted the part of this Russian's text where he said he didn't believe the rumor about the tapes, for which no evidence has ever surfaced. Again, this is why this whole thing is what Devin Nunes is calling the Mueller dossier, because it's salacious and unverified. The Mueller report spins uncorroborated information towards collusion, according to Devin Nunes, and casts the Trump campaign in the most sinister light. The report implies there may be a kernel of truth to the dossier's charges when there isn't. Remember, the FBI paid Steele $50,000 during the 2016 campaign, and there were $310,000 and $732 in payments to outside contractors, and all but that last bit were for IT services, which covers April through September of 2018. So they're not telling us what the $310,000 were in IT services, but it's very likely that this is where the money went, is to pay Fusion GPS and Christopher Steele and Glenn Simpson and probably Nellie Orr. So the Steele story is falling apart. This was another story that came out today. Notes were taken by Deputy Assistant Secretary of State Kathleen Kavalik on October 11th of 2016. Okay, so this is during the Obama administration. In her notes, she says a top official met with Steele in October 2016 and determined that some of the quote-unquote dirt that Steele was digging up for the FBI and Hillary Clinton's campaign was inaccurate and likely leaked to the media. So the FBI knew this because she sent the information to them. 10 days later, the FBI used the Steele dossier to justify securing a warrant to spy on the Trump campaign and their advisor, Carter Page. The FBI, however, swore on October 21st of 2016, so this is 10 days later, to the FISA judges that Steele's reporting had been corroborated and used in criminal proceedings, and the FBI has determined him to be reliable and that they're unaware of any derogatory information pertaining to the informant. Steele simultaneously worked for Fusion GPS, the firm paid by the Democratic National Committee and the Clinton campaign to find dirt on Trump, linking him to Russia. So in her typed summary, Kathleen Kavalik wrote that Steele told her the Russians had constructed a technical/human operation run out of Moscow targeting the election that recruited emigres in the United States to do hacking and recruiting. She quoted Steele as saying payments to those recruited are made out of the Russian consulate in Miami. Oh, problem there, Mr. Steele. She writes in her report, it's important to note that there is no Russian consulate in Miami. Gee, you should really check your facts out before you lie. Kavalik's handwritten note clearly flagged in multiple places that Steele might be talking to the media. 2 days later, and well before the FISA warrant was issued, Kavalik forwarded her typed summary to other government officials. That would include the FBI, although we don't know exactly who got the information because it's all been redacted, but if she was doing her job, it should have gone to the FBI. Her memo clearly warned that Steele had admitted his client was keen to get information out before Election Day to help Hillary. In other words, he had a political rather than an intelligence deadline. Now, the lost FBI notes hide Hillary's deal with China. Again, we have more lost information. So this was a report coming out in the Epoch Times, which says that the FBI lost notes from a 2015 meeting with people from the Office of the Intelligence Community Inspector General, or the ICIG, and this is newly released FBI records on the investigation of former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's alleged mishandling of classified information. So here's what they discovered, and this was in response to a FOIA request for those meeting notes. Representative Louis Gohmert, Republican of Texas, along with multiple anonymous sources, has alleged that Clinton's server was compromised by a foreign hostile power which was receiving her incoming and outgoing emails. And a former intelligence officer has said when the ICIG did a very deep dive, they found in the actual metadata, the data which is at the header and footer of all the emails, that a copy, a courtesy copy, a complimentary copy was being sent to a third party, and that the third party was a known Chinese public company that was involved in collecting intelligence for China. So here are the details of that. On August 3rd of 2015, there was a meeting, and this is less than a month after the ICIG made a referral to the FBI that classified information may have been disclosed in an unauthorized manner to a foreign power. This is again under the Obama/Clinton administration. All right, how did they know this? Because Clinton conducted State Department business through an email hosted on an insufficiently secured server in her basement. Several of these meetings in which the ICIG officials passed a lead to the FBI about anomalies in the metadata of the emails, indicating that a copy of nearly every email was sent to an agent of a foreign power. This is, again, a lot of us that have been following the Great Awakening movement, and I've reported on this before, but now we have the FOIA request coming out, and they can't find the notes. The FBI acknowledged that Clinton's emails could have been breached by foreign actors who covered their tracks, but denied that any evidence of foreign infiltration was found. Well, you wouldn't find it if you were actually giving them a complimentary copy. Several current and former senior FBI officials involved in the Clinton case denied in congressional testimonies any recollection of receiving the metadata lead. Sometimes you just have to pause and consider how much corruption and evil. It's like every way that they could think of doing evil, they were doing it. Okay, let's get to some of the rest of the news, which is pretty thick also. We have dodging bullets here. We've got a raid in a mansion in California, Holmby Hills. I'll give you the details on this in just a second. But Q Blue Sky on Twitter said that this is Getty's secret double life and his second family in LA. And this is a Bel Air mansion where court records show that the property is owned by Cynthia Beck, who has 3 daughters with John Paul Getty's son, Gordon Getty. I have not verified this. I've seen a lot of chatter about it, so I don't know, but it's something certainly that we can dig on. So authorities received a complaint that a resident was selling and manufacturing guns out of his home. Agents collected over 1,000 weapons of all sorts and 1,000 rounds of ammunition. It is illegal to sell weapons without a permit. Very interesting. What were they going to do with those weapons and who was buying them? Now, this is just a couple of things that were out there, and we have our hero William Barr holding them back, but for how long? On May 8th, Attorney General Barr was greeted with a standing ovation as he walked into the cabinet room for today's cabinet meeting. This comes as the House Judiciary Committee continues to prepare a contempt of Congress resolution for Barr, which they passed, and I think the House will be voting on that soon. Of course, because it's a Democrat-controlled House, I'm not sure, but I would imagine that we're going to be seeing that come from the House. But then, just a few hours ago, this is breaking from Jack Posobiec, the judge in the Roger Stone case orders Barr to submit an unredacted copy of the Mueller Report for her to review before ruling if it can be released to Roger Stone's legal team. Again, we just don't know what's going to happen with all of this stuff. And I know that the president, again in this press conference today, he talked about releasing information, and he seems to be happy to bide his time, and I know that he will choose the right time to release everything. Now, remember, you can't impeach a popular president, and that's what the Democrats would love to do. This is a picture from last evening in Panama City, Florida, where the president was speaking. This is hours before he spoke, because I believe it was dark by the time he started speaking. His approval rating, according to the mainstream media, is at 45%, and that's his average. This is according to an average of polls calculated by an aggregator. The last time Trump hit that mark was February 21st of 2017, which is right after he was inaugurated. The highest number his average job approval reached on Real Clear Politics was 46% on February 4th, and the lowest was 37% in December of 2017. So he's doing fine, and you cannot impeach a man that is popular with the people. One of the reasons for that is, take a look at this tweet. Great news for Ohio. This was from yesterday. Just spoke to Mary Barra, CEO of General Motors, who informed me that subject to a UAW agreement, that's the union, GM will be selling their beautiful Lordstown plant to Workhorse, where they plan to build electric trucks. GM will also be spending $700 million in Ohio in 3 separate locations, creating another 450 jobs. I have been working nicely with GM to get this done. Thank you to Mary B., your great governor, and Senator Rob Portman. With all the car companies coming back and much more, the USA is booming. And then this is from Representative Dan Crenshaw. What you won't learn by watching the news, the House unanimously passed 2 pieces of legislation that will make it easier to get generic prescription drugs to market. More generics mean lower costs for Americans. Bipartisan solutions are possible even in divided government. And that's what President Trump started his press conference today talking about. Now, we are winning at the border, but it is far from over. It's just piecemeal, so we've got to keep this in our prayers. First of all, an appeals court ruled late Tuesday that asylum seekers must go back to Mexico to wait out court proceedings. This ruling is by the Ninth Court, and it reverses a decision by a San Francisco judge. The case will be considered at a lower court in San Francisco and could end up in the Supreme Court. In the meantime, the policy of allowing these illegals to remain in the U.S. has been halted. And I also got this from breaking news. ICE has announced a new program that allows local law enforcement officials to start arresting and temporarily detaining illegal aliens on behalf of ICE, even if state and local policies prevent them from doing so. That's also very good news. And remember, Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida is outlawing sanctuary cities. Then this is coming from National Review today. The Pentagon says it now has money for 256 more miles of border wall. And that's good news, and it can't come fast enough. We have April's shocking border statistics illustrate the worsening humanitarian and security crisis. We had 109,144 illegal immigrants arriving at the southwest border, which is an increase of 5% over March, which was already setting records. You might remember that the other day we had a shooting in Highlands Ranch, Colorado, that killed one student who was a hero. He tried to chase down the shooters, one of the shooters, and he himself was killed. So there was a vigil last night celebrating the student's life and his heroism, and also, I suppose, to pray for the 7 other victims who are in the hospital. And the Democrats ruined it by getting up and speaking to support gun confiscations and taking away our rights to protect ourselves. Well, the kids didn't like it one bit, and these kids walked out of a vigil for their slain classmate in protest of those politicians and other groups who are using this vigil as a platform for gun control. Way to go, next generation. Now let's talk about censorship, which is always worse before a war. Not that we're going to war, but the war now is the civil war between the left and the conservatives, and it's really getting bad. Paul Joseph Watson tweeted this on May 7th. Instagram has announced that it will begin fact-checking and removing memes. Studies have shown the right is far more effective at spreading political memes. I'm sure it's just a coincidence. He's one of many who have lost their platforms on various social media websites. Chris Hughes is one of the co-founders of Facebook, supposedly, although we know it was a government program by the CIA called LifeLog. But anyway, Chris Hughes says, I'm calling for breaking up Facebook in an essay in the New York Times. Facebook has become too big and too powerful and is part of a trend in our economy of an increasing concentration of corporate power. We can fix this, break the company up, and regulate it. Then within the article he says, as I have previously highlighted, Zuckerberg is such a power-mad narcissist that Facebook is now attempting to dictate what opinions its 2.4 billion users are allowed to have. Facebook is the most powerful, most dangerous cult on the planet, and Zuckerberg, despite lacking the charisma that is hallmark of cult leaders, most certainly is one. And then Paul Joseph Watson tweeted again, if upheld by the courts, This is first in Poland, and then on the European Union level, this law would force the platforms to leave all lawful speech alone and stop taking down posts, profiles, and pages simply because it feels like it. So this is a Polish group suing Facebook for private censorship, and that could become a landmark case. Now let's talk about the evil in the pro-life versus pro-death movement. John Rogers is a lawmaker in Alabama, and he was recorded on the House floor in Montgomery, Alabama, screaming that kill 'em now or kill 'em later, unwanted children should just die. Apparently that was so successful, I wonder who noticed, Planned Parenthood I'm sure, that now Rogers says he's a candidate for United States Senate. He told Yellowhammer News, which is Yellowhammer's a name for Alabama. I have no idea where that came from, but he says, I'm running for real. I'm not backing down. I'm a candidate. I asked them to give me $1 million in campaign pledges to be able to run, and already $500,000 has come in. And so if I get $500,000, I'll be an official candidate. I'm telling you right now. Well, I don't know who's sending him that money, but I'll bet it's Planned Parenthood. Speaking of Planned Parenthood, do you remember this guy who is a representative in Pennsylvania? His name is Brian Sims. He was assaulting verbally this lady and these gals outside of a Planned Parenthood clinic on Locust Street in Philadelphia. And he was wanting information on the names of these girls. These girls are only 15 years old, or this woman, because he wants to publish their information. It's called doxing. So Live Action, which is a pro-life organization, published this tweet: Pennsylvania Representative Brian Sims' harassment of a woman and his intent to dox pro-life teens is unacceptable. Join our rally this Friday at 11 a.m. and hear from pro-life leaders. And then a couple of gals from, well, at least one from the movie Unplanned, Abby Johnson, is going to be there, and some others. And I just will pray for them in a minute that this rally is hugely successful, so much so that the mainstream media is forced to cover it. And this guy needs to go. So, Father, we bring all this to you right now. We pray that this man, we prayed for his salvation the other day. I'm not going to do that again. But I just pray that he would just disappear from the public scene, as well as this guy, Representative John Rogers. And Father, may his own community come after him for what he is doing and shame him for being a promoter of death. Father, I also pray that this guy would disappear and he would lose his platform, that he resigns and he just goes away, and the government steps in and regulates Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and all sorts of these platforms so that they cannot censor conservatives. We pray for our president. We pray for all the things that he's trying to do that are good for our nation. I want to pray for Donald Trump Jr., that he would be able to stand strong in light of all this subpoena nonsense. Give them direction on what they should do and the way they should go. Father, we pray for good men in Washington, good women in Washington, like Senator Rand Paul and Senator Kevin McCarthy, who have said, no, this needs to end. This Mueller report is dead in the water and we need to move on. And Father, we remember our president. We just ask that you continue to guide him and protect him and his family. In Jesus' name. And I thank you all so much for watching. I know it's been a long one. May God bless you, and I will see you next time.